There are very few people in Hollywood history who have succeeded at two entirely different careers in front of and behind the camera, decades apart, without ever really leaving the public eye. Ron Howard is one of them. Before he was an Oscar-winning director, he was America's favorite freckle-faced kid, a boy the whole country watched grow up on their television screens. This is the story of how a 5-year-old with a toy turtle became one of the most respected filmmakers of his generation, told through the documented facts of his childhood, his years on two of television's most beloved sitcoms, and the 6-decade directing career that followed. Ronald William Howard was born on March 1, 1954, in Duncan, Oklahoma, the elder of two sons born to Rance Howard and Jean Spiegel Howard. Both of his parents were actors. His father, born Harold Engel Beckenholt on a farm in Newkirk, Oklahoma, had discovered a love of performing during a 7th-grade Christmas play and later adopted the stage name Rance Howard when he pursued acting professionally. Rance met Jean Spiegel while the two were students at the University of Oklahoma, where he studied drama. They married in 1949 in Winchester, Kentucky, and moved to New York City together, touring with a children's theater company before Rance's break came in the early 1950s, when he spent roughly a year and a half performing in the national touring production of Mr. Roberts alongside Henry Fonda. At the time of Ron's birth, Rance was serving a 3-year stint in the United States Air Force, where he directed plays for the Special Services Entertainment Unit. Ron's heritage traces back to German, English, Scottish, Irish, and Dutch ancestry, and his family's theatrical background meant that show business wasn't something he stumbled into as a child star so much as something he was simply born into. In 1958, when Ron was 4, the family moved to Hollywood, and the following year his younger brother, Clint Howard, was born. Clint would go on to have his own long career as a character actor. Ron's screen debut came remarkably early. At 18 months old, he appeared alongside his father in the 1956 Western film Frontier Woman. According to Rance's own retelling, the director needed a child to cry on cue during a scene and asked if baby Ronnie could be used for the moment, and the elder Howard agreed. 2 years later, at age 2, Ron made his stage debut in a production of The 7-Year Itch. Throughout the following years, he continued to pick up small television and film roles, arranged largely through his family's connections to the stage and screen world, appearing in the 1959 film The Journey opposite Yul Brynner, Deborah Kerr, and Jason Robards, as well as guest spots on shows including The Twilight Zone, Dennis the Menace, and The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis. He also became a regular on the anthology series Playhouse 90, a role that would prove to be the turning point of his childhood career because it caught the attention of Sheldon Leonard, the television producer developing a new spin-off vehicle for comedian Andy Griffith. Because he was working steadily from such a young age, Ron's education followed an unusual path. He was tutored on set at Desilu Studios, the production company then run by Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, and later attended a sequence of Burbank Public Schools, Robert Louis Stevenson Elementary, David Starr Jordan Junior High, and finally John Burroughs High School, from which he graduated in 1972. He later enrolled in the University of Southern California's School of Cinematic Arts, but left before completing his degree once his acting and directing opportunities began to accelerate. In 1960, at age 6, Ron Howard was cast as Opie Taylor, the young son of widowed Sheriff Andy Taylor, in The Andy Griffith Show. The series, which had originated as a backdoor pilot on The Danny Thomas Show, premiered on CBS on October 3, 1960, and would go on to run for 8 seasons and 249 episodes, ending its run in 1968 as the #1 rated show in America, a rare feat shared by only a handful of series in television history. Credited during the show's run as Ronnie Howard, he played Opie for all 8 seasons, appearing alongside Andy Griffith, Don Knotts as the excitable Deputy Barney Fife, and Frances Bavier as Aunt Bee, the widowed sheriff's live-in aunt who helped raise Opie. Howard has spoken many times over the decades about his earliest memories on the show. Recalling his first days on set, he has described being 5 years old and preoccupied with a small prop, a toy turtle he was meant to treat as though it were a real, dead turtle in an emotional scene, even though there was no actual creature to react to. He remembered Andy Griffith taking a moment to talk with him about how strange it was to have to pretend the toy was something it wasn't, and Howard has said the exchange left him with a relaxed, easygoing first impression of the set that essentially defined his whole experience on the show. Because he could not yet read fluently, his father would sit with him and walk through his lines the way one might work through homework, and Howard has joked that he only bothered to learn cursive handwriting so that he would be able to sign autographs. The show's tone was deliberately old-fashioned even for its own era. Although The Andy Griffith Show was filmed and set during the early 1960s, Griffith wanted the fictional town of Mayberry, North Carolina, to feel more like a small town from decades earlier, and he was insistent that the humor of the show come from an audience laughing with its characters rather than at them. Howard has recalled that the cast and crew held weekly read-throughs on Thursdays where the creative team would work through story and joke problems together, and that even as a child, he was allowed to sit in and absorb how professionals solved storytelling challenges, an experience he has since credited as foundational to his later understanding of filmmaking. He has recounted one moment during the show's second season when he questioned a line of dialogue as not sounding like something a boy his age would say, and the episode's director let him suggest an alternative, which was ultimately used. Howard has also described the different personalities among his castmates. He remembered Don Knotts as reserved and quiet off-camera, someone who would only slip into his comedic persona when Andy Griffith got him going, at which point the two would fall into old bits together. Frances Bavier, by contrast, has been described by Howard and others as more private and reserved on set than her warm, nurturing Aunt Bee character suggested, someone who tended to keep to herself rather than take part in the impromptu joking and music sessions that happened between takes. This is a documented and relatively mild observation about differing personalities and work styles rather than evidence of any personal conflict between the two, and there is no verified account establishing hostility between Howard and Bavier during the years they worked together. The Andy Griffith Show was a genuine ratings phenomenon. It never finished lower than 7th in the Nielsen ratings during its run and closed out its 8th and final season as the #1 show on American television, a distinction shared by only a small number of series, including I Love Lucy and Seinfeld. Despite this success, the show was nominated for the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Comedy Series 3 times without ever winning, losing to The Jack Benny Show, The Bob Newhart Show, and The Monkees in different years. Don Knotts and Frances Bavier, however, each won acting Emmys for their performances during the show's run. According to Howard's own retelling of the show's 1968 wrap party in a 2023 interview, the ending was bittersweet. The series was the #1 show in the country, and it was Andy Griffith himself who wanted to move on and bring the show to a close after its 8th season. Howard has said that as a young teenager on the verge of turning his attention to school and sports, he did not feel particularly tormented by the show's ending during filming, but that the emotional weight of leaving what had effectively become a second family caught up with him at the wrap party itself, when Griffith addressed the cast and crew. While playing Opie, Howard also took on other roles, most notably originating the part of Winthrop Peru, the lisping young son of Mary and the Librarian, in the 1962 film adaptation of the Broadway musical The Music Man, opposite Robert Preston, Shirley Jones, and Buddy Hackett. He would go on to reprise the role of Opie one final time in the 1986 made-for-television reunion film Return to Mayberry, and later took part in several televised cast reunions, as well as a 1982 Saturday Night Live sketch in which he and Griffith briefly reprised Sheriff Taylor and Opie for the studio audience. After The Andy Griffith Show ended its run in 1968, Howard did not simply vanish from Hollywood the way some child actors do. He continued working steadily throughout the late 1960s and early 1970s, appearing in guest roles on shows such as The Big Valley, I Spy, Land of the Giants, Daniel Boone, and M*A**S*H, and taking a lead role from 1971 to 1972 as Bob Smith, the son of Henry Fonda's character, in the ABC drama series The Smith Family, his only regular television role outside of The Andy Griffith Show and Happy Days. His most significant role of this period, however, came in 1973 when director George Lucas cast him as Steve Bolander in the coming-of-age film American Graffiti. The film became a cultural phenomenon and helped ignite a wave of nostalgia for 1950s and early 1960s American youth culture, a wave that would directly shape the next chapter of Howard's career. That wave of nostalgia led to Happy Days, an ABC sitcom created by Gary Marshall that began, much like The Andy Griffith Show before it, as an unsold backdoor pilot segment that aired as part of the anthology series Love, American Style in 1972, titled Love and the Television Set. When ABC greenlit the concept as its own series in 1974, Howard was cast in the lead role of Richie Cunningham, a clean-cut teenager growing up in 1950s Milwaukee alongside his best friend, the leather-jacketed, motorcycle-riding Arthur, Fonzie Fonzarelli, played by Henry Winkler, and his parents, played by Tom Bosley and Marion Ross. Happy Days ultimately ran for 11 seasons and 255 episodes between January 1974 and July 1984, becoming one of the most successful sitcoms of the decade. Howard was already a known quantity when the show began, having spent his childhood as Opie, but Happy Days introduced him to an entirely new generation of viewers as a young adult performer, and his on-screen chemistry with Winkler became one of the defining elements of the series. That chemistry was tested early on, when the show's ratings dipped in its second season, going head-to-head against the popular spin-off Good Times. Network executives considered retooling the series to foreground its breakout character by renaming it Fonzie's Happy Days. Howard has said in interviews that he was prepared to leave the show entirely rather than accept that change, not because he objected to the network building up Winkler's character creatively, but because he did not want to be reduced to a supporting player in a series he had signed on to as part of an ensemble. Winkler himself, by Howard's account, was uncomfortable with the idea as well, and ABC ultimately did not go through with the title change. Behind the scenes, Howard was already laying the groundwork for the career that would define the rest of his life. He had wanted to direct since he was around 15 years old, and during his time on Happy Days he began renting 16mm sound equipment on weekends to shoot short films. He also enrolled at USC's film school while working on the series, attending classes, and developing his directorial ambitions simultaneously with his acting job. His entry point into professional directing came through a deal with the low-budget producer Roger Corman. Howard agreed to star in Corman's Eat My Dust, in exchange for the opportunity to direct his own feature. That opportunity became Grand Theft Auto, a 1977 action comedy that Howard co-wrote with his father and which he also starred in. Made for roughly $602,000, the film turned a solid profit and gave Howard his first real directing credit. Between 1978 and 1982, he went on to direct several television movies for NBC, including the 1980 film Skyward, starring Bette Davis. By 1980, Howard was ready to leave acting behind. According to contemporaneous reporting at the time, his departure from Happy Days was driven largely by frustration with ABC's unwillingness to let him take on more responsibility in the show's production beyond his role as an actor. Howard has said the network continued to see him primarily as Richie and did not take his directing ambitions seriously. When former ABC executive Fred Silverman, who had since moved to NBC, offered him a contract that would let him direct television movies, Howard left Happy Days just before the start of its 8th season. Richie Cunningham was written out of the show by having the character join the Army, though Howard did return for guest appearances during the show's 11th and final season, reprising Richie for an arc in which the character comes home with his wife and son before eventually leaving again to pursue a career in screenwriting. Howard's break as a serious feature director came in 1982 with Night Shift, a comedy starring Michael Keaton in his film debut alongside Henry Winkler and Shelley Long. It was on this production that Howard first worked with producer Brian Grazer, a partnership that would go on to define both of their careers. 2 years later, the pair collaborated again on Splash, a romantic fantasy comedy starring Tom Hanks, Daryl Hannah, Eugene Levy, and John Candy, which became both a critical and commercial success and earned Grazer an Academy Award nomination for his screenplay contribution. In November 1985, Howard and Grazer formally co-founded Imagine Entertainment, the production company that would go on to produce or co-produce a staggering number of films and television series over the following decades, collectively earning dozens of Academy Award nominations and well over 100 Emmy nominations. Through the mid to late 1980s and into the 1990s, Howard directed a string of films that demonstrated